Hi everyone, I'm a girl from Syria. As you may know, Syrians have suffered more than any other people from the genocidal terrorism of ISIS. So as a Syrian girl, take my word for it when I tell you that Israel is the Jewish version of ISIS. The Jewish state, just like the Islamic State in the Levant, is a religious state built by foreign terrorists on the land stolen from the people of the Levant. Just like ISIS, the first Zionist Jewish militants used global terrorism to create Israel. Just like ISIS, they believe God gives them the right to the land of the people of the Levant. Just like ISIS, they commit genocide against the native people of the Levant who do not follow their brand of religion, burning churches, mosques, and ethnically cleansing anyone who isn't Jewish. And just like ISIS, they think that if they create their religious state, it will bring about the arrival of the Messiah and the apocalypse. Just like ISIS, they are multinational. They come from all over the world to displace the people of the Levant. And just like ISIS, Israel has never declared its borders and wants to keep expanding into the surrounding nations. Just like ISIS, the Jewish state is propped up by foreign billionaires and backhand deals with politicians. They sell their state with a story of victimhood. For ISIS, that's Islamophobia. For Israel, it's anti-Semitism. And just like other terrorists, the Jewish state in the Levant, or JSIL for short, is a threat to the world. Except it's worse than ISIS, because it's basically ISIS with nuclear weapons. Point 1. The use of terrorism. Today, Islamic terrorists are the main threat you hear about in the media. But in the 1930s and 40s, the religion most frequently associated with terrorism was Judaism. George Orwell's 1984 was written in 1948, and the main terrorist character in the book was Emanuel Goldstein, a Jewish name. At the time, the three major Jewish terrorist groups were Irgun, Haganah, and Lehi. They conducted terror attacks around the world. In 1920, Syria declared independence as a Levant nation that included Palestine and Lebanon. The British and French invaded that nation and divided it up. Syrians and Palestinians complained to the League of Nations about this invasion. And they were already aware that the Zionist ideology was going to be a threat. At that time, Jewish illegal immigrants radicalized by Zionism were already crossing the border into Palestine. This was long before World War II. The idea of Zionism was still considered lunatic fringe by the majority of Jews in the world. These militant Zionists were frustrated that British occupation soldiers were getting in their way of taking over Palestinian land. So they began targeting them with terrorist attacks. Here's a news clip from that time.
We start in the harbour at Haifa, among still more shiploads of illegal Jewish immigrants seeking homes in Palestine. Closely guarded, bringing their children with them, they are searched for arms and sprayed as a precaution against typhus-carrying lice. More tinder for the Palestine powder keg, these Jews are now being sent to Cyprus to await international decisions on disputed Palestine. Meantime, the roundup of terrorist killers goes on. Manacled ex-lieutenants of dead gangster Abraham Stern, these men face murder charges after attacks on British workshops in Haifa. 18 Stern gang members have been condemned to death. Among the captured were 4 women. Supporting a wounded companion, they go for trial. Often placed in the front ranks of rioting mobs, terrorist women are a new provocation to British troops.
Some of the terror attacks they conducted included the King David Hotel bombing in Jerusalem, in which 91 people were killed. They also sent letter bombs to American President Will Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and any other politician they thought was getting in the way of their Jewish state. Their method of execution was not beheadings, but hangings. These are 2 British soldiers hung by Jewish terrorist groups. Palestinian police did their best to arrest these terrorists, but thousands of them were streaming in from Europe. Eventually, the 3 main Jewish terrorist groups, Irgun, Haganah, and Lehi, joined forces into what is now known as the IDF. and leaders of the terrorist groups became the prime ministers and presidents of Israel. Israel's second prime minister, Moshe Sharat, was once imprisoned for terrorism. Another Israeli prime minister, Yitzhak Shamir, was responsible for assassinating a British minister, Lord Moyne. One of the reasons Britain decided to give legitimacy to the terror state of Israel is that they hoped it would lead to an end of these terror attacks. Believe it or not, some have suggested doing the same for ISIS. But even after Israel was created, Zionists continued to use terrorism. They conducted the Lavon Affair, where they bombed American, British and Egyptian civilians and tried to pin it on Muslims. Later, they admitted they were the ones behind it and awarded the terrorists. Mossad was also found to have at least had foreknowledge of the events on 9/11. Just look up the dancing Israelis. Both ISIS and Israel believe that God gives them the right to the land of the people of the Levant by virtue of their religion. ISIS leader al-Baghdadi once told his followers, "Rush, O Muslims, to your state. Yes, it is your state. Rush, because Syria is not for Syrians and Iraq is not for Iraqis." In the same way, Zionist Jewish terrorists believe God gave them the right to Palestinian land and that Palestine is not for Palestinians.
This is my land. God gave it to me.
Please.
You need to. You can't come in here. This is not your house.
This is not your house.
We killed Jesus. We're proud of it. This is my land.
This is not your land. It belongs to these families.
Land, you son of a bitch. I'm gonna kill you and the Palestinians. You bastard. This is my house. This is my land. God gave it to me.
At the barrel of a gun, Israelis take over Palestinian homes, throw out their belongings and move in.
هم بيتي شوف بيتي هم بيتي خلاص أخذوا كل شيء طاري أخذوا داري.
This is what was happening in Sheikh Jarrah recently in East Jerusalem.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
you are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
זה לא שלי.
If you won't take my word for it, let the Israelis tell you themselves.
We take house after house. All this area will be a Jewish neighborhood. We are not finished the job. We are going to the next neighborhood, and after that we will go more. Our dream that all East Jerusalem will be like West Jerusalem, Jewish capital of Israel. אני רואה בזה המשך של המפעל היהודי-ציוני, המשך שיבת ציון. זה הכל. זה בא על חשבון הערבים? כן, גם בג"ץ והכנסת בנויים על חשבון ערבים, וגם המדינה כאן הוקמה, כן, על חשבון חלק מהתושבים הערבים שגרו פה. וזהו.
Their plan is to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. If they don't do that by stealing Palestinian homes, they do it by bulldozing their homes and farms. And if they don't bulldoze those homes with a bulldozer, they raze entire apartment blocks to the ground with a bomb. Israel's current assault on Gaza isn't aimed at resistance rockets. Those are safely hidden deep underground. They're destroying these apartment buildings to turn Palestinians into refugees as part of their ethnic cleansing campaign and to punish them for resisting. Point 3. Foreign fighters. It is important to note that many of the Jews taking over Palestinian homes have flown in recently from places like New York or even India. In fact, they were promised a free home built on Palestinian land in the West Bank if they do aliyah into Israel. Jewish settlers are also armed, and they are not civilians, they are foreign fighters. Israeli foreign fighters are multinational, just like ISIS. It's the same as when ISIS fly the wife and kids to the Islamic State in Syria and take over a Syrian person's home. Who else has the kind of religious zealotry to willingly fly their children into a war zone? They are just as violent and disgusting as ISIS. They commit atrocities against Palestinians, like setting fire to babies asleep in their homes and then celebrating it. This photo was taken as these men were on their way to set fire to a Christian monastery. That's another thing that Israel has in common with ISIS. It is built on the genocide of anyone who doesn't follow their brand of religion. When Israel was formed in 1948, they drove out Palestinians, the same way ISIS drove out Christians and Yazidis from Iraq. The Jewish terrorist group Irgun, Haganah and Lehi, which combined to form the IDF, began going from town to town slaughtering Palestinians. The Christian town of Ikrit in Galilee was reduced to ash by the IDF on Christmas Eve. The Syrian Golan Heights, which was invaded by the Zionists, used to be 12% Christian before Israel burned down all the Christian villages and churches, and people escaped the atrocities en masse. Some of these Palestinians became refugees in Europe and America. Gigi Hadid's father became a refugee in 1948 when his family let a Jewish refugee family stay in their homes, only to one day find that the Jewish family changed the key and locked them out. Many Palestinians still have the keys and deeds to their homes that are now inhabited by Jewish illegal immigrants within what is now Israel. And those Palestinians are never allowed to return to their homes. But this isn't all ancient history. This was only 70 years ago. And it's still continuing today. To this day, Jewish extremists are setting fire to Palestinian churches and mosques. And as you have seen in the last 2 weeks, they continue to kill Palestinians and steal their homes and drive them out, to create refugees all over the world. The truth is, the only problem Israel has with Palestinians is that they are not Jewish. At least ISIS would give them the chance to convert. Point 5. Ever-expanding borders. The genocide of Palestine is ongoing because Israel is constantly trying to expand. You see, Israel has never declared its borders. One of the features of a country is that it has declared its borders. But neither the Islamic State nor the Jewish state have done this. When the UN Security Council broke its own charter and laws to balkanize Palestine into a Jewish and Palestinian sector, they made the territories discontiguous in a strange Harlequin pattern. Even though the UN had given the majority of Palestinian land to a minority of illegal Jewish immigrants, that wasn't enough for them. In the decades to come, Israel eroded what was left of designated Palestinian land. Netanyahu and Kushner declared their intent to annex the West Bank and Jerusalem and the Syrian Golan Heights. But they don't intend to allow Palestinians to remain there and become Israeli citizens. No, they want to drive them all out. All of this is against international law. But what do terrorists care about international law? Israel's borders have always been ill-defined. In the beginning, when Zionists discussed creating a Jewish state, there were many competing borders proposed. But just like ISIS, they had their eyes on taking over the entire Levant, including Syria. The first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, said Israel should be everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. This is Greater Israel. It may seem like a crazy delusion, but that won't stop crazy people from trying to make it happen. It is no coincidence that the only part of Syria the US occupies is east of the Euphrates River. You see, the reason they believe they need to take over the whole Levant is the same reason of ISIS. It's because they think it will trigger the coming of the Messiah and the end of the world. They think they have to rebuild this third temple for the Messiah to come. ISIS believes that the Messiah is Jesus, and by taking over Damascus, Jesus will return and the apocalypse will begin. ISIS follows a sect of Islam called Wahhabism. Both Zionism and Wahhabism are Messianic apocalyptic cults. Zionism is to Judaism as Wahhabism is to Islam. Christian evangelical Zionists also share this Messianic derangement syndrome. All of them are willing to cause war and carnage all over the world to achieve their goal of the apocalypse. AIPAC is the leading cause of many of the wars that the US is forced to take part in.
Because the fact is, we don't have to be in the Middle East other than we want to protect Israel.
The problem is Israel has nukes, which makes it a much bigger threat. They have what is known as the Samson option. Basically, if they go down, they're going to take the whole world with them. Both ISIL and JSIL, the Jewish state in the Levant, gather recruits and fresh foreign fighters by selling a victimhood narrative. Netanyahu asks Jews of Europe to migrate to the Levant by claiming they would feel marginalized in the West. ISIS does exactly the same thing, only for ISIS they use Islamophobia, and for Israel they use anti-Semitism. Both ISIL and JSIL exist only because of support of foreign states and billionaires. It was Saudi billionaires that bankrolled ISIS, and it was billionaires like Sheldon Adelson who purchased the GOP, and Lord Rothschild that had Lord Balfour sign the Balfour Declaration promising Palestine to the Jews, in exchange for bankrolling Britain in World War I. In fact, ISIS and Israel are so close to each other that Israel supports ISIS in Syria. Israel's intel chief said he doesn't want ISIS to lose in Syria. Israel's defense minister said he prefers an ISIS victory in Syria. Israel even provided medical aid to Al-Qaeda during the war, and are seen here photographed with Al-Qaeda militants.
There have been reports that Israel has been treating wounded Syrian rebel fighters in its hospitals on the border, including fighters from Nusra Front, which is of course the Al-Qaeda proxy in Syria.
Al-Qaeda, to the best of my recollection, has up to now not attacked Israel.
But it's attacked your number one ally and protector and sponsor, the United States of America. There is a quote-unquote war on terror being going on for 15 years.
Now this is a much longer topic, and it deserves a video of its own. What we have learned from the ongoing violence in the last few weeks is that the solution to terrorism is not to negotiate with it, is not to concede to its demands. The world made a terrible mistake when they allowed Zionists to maintain a terror state for the last 70 years. It has been a detriment not only to the people of the Levant, the Palestinians and Syrians and Lebanese, but to the whole world. The only solution to this problem is the one-state solution, where everyone lives as equal citizens of a secular Levantine state. That is exactly what the Syrian state that declared independence in 1920 was, a secular state for all of the people of the Levant. And that is what should happen again. Please subscribe for more news and analysis, and support me on Patreon if you have a spare dime to fling my way every month.